Hi, I'm Sarah Ann Masse. I'm an actor, writer, filmmaker, comedian, singer, sexual violence survivor, and founder of Higher Survivors Hollywood.
And I know that you also stand up for genders, races, nationalities on top of just fighting for these survivors to have their right in Hollywood. And I wanted to ask you, now that you've seen the industry and you've seen it growing over the years, do you see a change in Hollywood when it comes to representation?
Yeah, I think I do. I don't think it's enough. I think, people often ask me that in terms of like the issue of sexual violence and survivors. And it's like, well, it's been 5 years. Don't you think more should have happened? Do you feel like enough has happened? And it's like 5 years is both very long and very short. And there have been people for decades and decades and decades fighting for equity and inclusion in this industry and in our society as a whole. And it's because of them that we do see better representation right now. But there's a long, long way to go. I think sometimes it's still very much paying lip service, or it's like one film in a slate of 30 a year that has maybe some better racial representation or, better gender parity or, honest representations of LGBTQ communities. I mean, that was when for me, I only came out very recently. I came out in June of last year as bisexual. And it took me a very long time to understand my own sexuality. And part of that was because I did not grow up with good representation of what it looked like to be bisexual. I saw gay men, I saw lesbian women, and I wasn't either of those. So I just assumed I must be straight. Like I didn't understand what my experience was. And it's why I'm so passionate as a storyteller. We help shape culture and understanding, and art can be an empathy machine, and you can see yourself represented. You can understand people that are different from you. And so I think we still have a really long way to go in terms of representing the full picture of what it looks like to be a human being in 2023.
And I love that you mentioned coming out in June, because I did want to talk about that, but also just speaking on the LGBTQ people and, them still fighting in Hollywood. That's all about what we talk about here, as well as just anyone that is still fighting to be on screen and to live their truth. So if you're willing, could you just expand a little bit on your coming out journey? I know that it's very recent and how it has impacted your life.
Yeah, I think that so I'm also invisibly disabled and chronically ill and neurodivergent and all of these things that are deeply part of who I am as a person, but I don't think I fully understood all of it until I started putting myself in context of other people. So for instance, with some of my chronic illnesses and disabilities, it wasn't until I got into a serious relationship with the man who's now my husband, and we would wake up in the morning and I would complain about my headache or my pains or my exhaustion. And he noticed it was every day. And it was only then that I realized, like, oh, that's not everyone's experience. Everybody doesn't wake up feeling terrible every day. Everybody doesn't have their shoulder pop out all the time. So I went on this journey with my disability that was quite similar to my journey with my sexuality, which is I didn't realize the way that I was looking at the world and sort of appreciating the people around me wasn't just everybody's experience. And there's this compulsory heterosexuality that we have foisted upon us, I think, from birth. It took me a long time to understand that I wasn't just appreciating a woman's beauty and that there was attraction there. And I just didn't understand it for like a criminally long time. And it feels silly to say it, but it was partially like watching shows like Our Flag Means Death that allowed me to see like adults exploring and discovering things about their sexuality when they thought that it had been one very clear thing for their whole lives, that let me start really asking myself those questions. I was also in group therapy where it was for survivors of sexual violence, and other women were sharing their stories about their own sexuality, and things started clicking in my head like, oh, that feels similar to what I've experienced. And so it's really about sharing in community and having art that represents all different paths that allowed my brain to open up to the idea that I wasn't just straight. It didn't matter that I had been married to a cishet man for a long time. It didn't matter that I was in a committed relationship. Like, my sexuality is part of who I am. And it's not just about how I relate to a romantic partner. It's about, something core to the way I experience the world. And it's been really freeing to be able to own that and express that and understand that about myself. And I'm still on that journey. I don't think it ever ends. I hope to constantly be understanding myself better and contextualizing my place in the world so I can be a better partner and friend and artist and advocate. Because if you can't understand yourself, it's harder to understand the people around you, I think.
Yes, that was so beautifully said. And thank you for sharing that. And I love that you always refer to yourself as a storyteller, which I mean is so, so true. But I just love that, putting that in that context of just sharing these stories for people to hear and understand and see themselves more in. So it's just really, really important. I also wanted to ask just about one more other title we haven't really talked about, which is just comedian. And I love that you have so much in film and so much in acting, and that's a big part of your life as well as the advocacy. But you also just do comedy, and I'd love to hear just more about that journey and what drew you to comedy.
I've always been really drawn to comedy, just even as a viewer. And I think, like, I started out even as a teenager, like doing Shakespeare and more dramatic work. And I played Lady Macbeth when I was very young. And even then, I was always looking for the moments of levity in the text, because I think characters are boring when they're just serious or evil or dark all the time. Like, even bad people are like full people who make jokes and have things that amuse them. And so I always wanted to pull out the comedy in every drama I did. And equally, I wanted to find the pathos and the drama in all of the comedy that I did. So I was always playing with those two sides of the coin. And when I met Nick, who's my husband, he was an actor like me, but he had also written sketch comedy. And I had done improv at this point. And I was sort of intrigued by the idea of writing sketch comedy, but also a little afraid of it and intimidated by it. But once we started creating together, it became very apparent that I did have a skill for joke writing and for, finding dynamic characters and being able to filter ideas and messages and issues that I thought were important into a comedic framework, so that you could like knock people's walls down, make them laugh, and then get them to take on the message. So I loved that. And also as an actor who was tired of like sitting around waiting for people to hire me, getting to write my own work and produce and film my own work was really fulfilling. So my husband and I started doing a sketch as a duo called We Are to Masse. His last name's Thomas, mine's Massey. It's a portmanteau. He's British, I'm American, and we got to explore all these really fun themes like femininity and toxic masculinity and like history and all of these things that I love. And it became really popular. Like, I didn't expect it, but we have 15 million views online, and we were on Funny or Die, and we had a live show at Second City in Hollywood for 3 years. And we're still doing it. We've slowed down a little bit during the pandemic, and because I've had sort of longer writing projects that I'm working on, but it kind of is always the backbone of knowing that I have this creative home to go back to. I can always make my own work. I can always sort of work things out through comedy and reach people of all sorts of backgrounds. And it's one of the most fun things I do.
And you have so much going on. I don't know how you are juggling all of this at once, but I wanted to ask, what projects do you have coming up that are exciting that you'd like to share? Is there anything else that you want to tell everyone about?
Yeah, I have, as a writer, I have been lucky enough to get my hands on this IP. There's a book series called The Chronicles of Kerrigan, and there's like 51 books in the series. I've been narrating the audiobooks for years, which is how I know the author. And she always wanted it to be turned into a film or a TV show, but wasn't interested in writing it herself. So I've developed it into a series, and I have a shopping agreement with this production company called Night Fox, and we've been pitching it around, and that's really exciting. And then I have a feature script that's out to some pretty exciting companies right now. So I'm like fingers crossed about all of that. And then as an actor, I'm really excited. I'm going to be playing a bisexual character in a film called Through the Rinse, hopefully filming this year. And it's my first time getting to portray someone who actually has my sexuality. And I filmed an indie last year called A More Perfect Union, where I get to play a character who actually has some of the same chronic illnesses I have. So there's some really cool stuff coming up. And then I'm also part of the cast of a musical called The Right Girl, which is aiming for Broadway. And it's written by a fellow Weinstein survivor named Louisette Geis. And it's just a beautiful show with all the music is by the legendary Diane Warren, and like getting to sing her songs. And it's very cool. So fingers crossed, lots of good things coming up.
Yes. That all sounds wonderful. Thank you so much for coming by and chatting with me and telling me all about this. It's so great to hear.